2 weeks after his funeral, she showed up, the woman who walked out on him 15 years ago. She didn't come to mourn. She came with a lawyer. And what she said next made my blood run cold. Alright, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor, subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. When my son died, I thought grief would be the hardest thing I'd face. I was wrong. The silence was the worst part. After the accident, after the funeral, after everyone went home, the house sounded different. As if the walls themselves knew he was gone. I would walk into the hallway and expect his voice, calling out, "Mom, you here?" But there was nothing. Just air. On the mantel, his life stared back at me in photographs. Daniel at 10, frosting smeared across his cheeks from a birthday cake. Daniel at 18, diploma in his hand, his grin wide and cocky. Daniel at 35, suited up, holding some award I barely understood from a tech conference. I raised him alone, after his father passed. It wasn't always easy. God, it was never easy. But we made it. And somewhere along the way, my boy became a man I was proud of. Then, in a single phone call, he was gone. A voice I didn't know, flat and cold. "Ma'am, I'm sorry. There's been an accident. He didn't make it." I don't remember what I said back. Maybe nothing. The room spun, the phone slipped, and suddenly I was standing in a world that didn't include my son anymore. The funeral came and went in a blur. Faces I didn't recognize, business partners, colleagues, people who shook my hand and whispered, "He was a brilliant man." Friends brought food, neighbors left flowers, casseroles piled on the kitchen counter. I thanked them. I nodded. But inside? I felt hollow. When the last guest left, I walked upstairs. Daniel's room looked just as it had the day he moved out years ago. The bed neatly made. The posters still on the wall. His old baseball cap hanging from the doorknob. A room frozen in time, while the man who once lived here was buried in the ground. I sat on his bed, and the weight of the house pressed down on me. Every corner felt too quiet. Every shadow seemed to carry his ghost. I whispered into the stillness, half hoping he could hear me. "This house feels too big without you." And in that moment, I believed the worst had already happened. That nothing could break me more than losing my only child. But I was wrong. The real nightmare hadn't even begun. A week after the funeral, I sat in a leather chair at my son's lawyer's office. The room smelled of paper and old coffee. Rain tapped against the windows. I remember thinking, this was the part no parent should ever have to face. Sorting through what was left behind. The lawyer, a polite man in a gray suit, cleared his throat and slid a folder across the desk. He spoke softly, as if volume could bruise me further. "Mrs. Hayes, your son's will is clear. He left everything to you." Everything? At first, I thought he meant the house, maybe his car, a savings account. But then he explained. Daniel had been more successful than I realized. Much more. Investments. Company shares. Property I didn't even know he owned. The total value? $24 million. $24 million. My breath caught in my throat. I almost laughed, because it felt impossible. This was Daniel, my boy who used to eat cereal straight from the box, who once bounced checks at college. When had he built an empire? And why hadn't he told me? The lawyer kept talking, words tumbling out. "Mrs. Hayes, your son was careful. He left instructions. He wanted no disputes. His estate is to pass entirely to you. No one else." I nodded, but the papers blurred before my eyes. The weight of that number pressed on me. I wasn't thinking about luxury or comfort. I was thinking about guilt. How could I sit in that chair, alive, breathing, while my son lay in the ground, and his life's work was handed to me like a prize? I should have felt grateful. Instead, I felt sick. I told the lawyer I needed time. He nodded, said he understood, and walked me to the door. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the streets still glistened with puddles. I remember clutching the folder to my chest, as if it were dangerous. As if the money itself carried teeth. And maybe, in a way, it did. Because what I didn't know then, what I couldn't have imagined, was that $24 million wasn't an inheritance. It was bait. And soon, someone from Daniel's past would come knocking, ready to claim it as their own. 2 weeks after the funeral, I thought life might finally grow quiet again. The casseroles had stopped coming. The neighbors no longer knocked. Even the phone had fallen silent. For the first time, I thought maybe I could sit with my grief, without the world watching. But then came the knock. 3 sharp raps on the door. Confident. Impatient. Not the kind of knock that says, "I'm here to comfort you." The kind that says, "I'm here to take something." I opened it, and froze. There she was. 15 years had passed, but I knew her face instantly. Raya. The woman who once promised to marry my son. The woman who vanished without a word, leaving Daniel broken and angry. The woman I had sworn never to forgive. She stood on my porch dressed in black, as if she belonged at the funeral she'd never attended. Her smile was thin. Her eyes were sharper. "Hello, Mrs. Hayes," she said. Like no time had passed. Like we were old friends. My stomach twisted. I gripped the doorframe and forced the words through my teeth. "You shouldn't be here." Her expression didn't change. She tilted her head slightly, as if amused. "I think I should. We need to talk. About Daniel, and what he owed me." Those words. What he owed me. I felt my chest tighten. Not grief. Not fear. But fury. I snapped back. "You left him. 15 years ago, you shattered him. You don't get to come here now, not after everything." Her smile faded. She took a slow breath and said, calm as stone, "I was part of his life, Mrs. Hayes. More than you know. And I have a claim. A rightful one." I slammed the door before she could say more. My hand shook as I locked it, my heart pounding in my throat. Through the wood, I heard her final words, muffled but clear. "This isn't over. You'll see me again." I stood there in the quiet house, my back pressed to the door. For the first time since Daniel's death, I wasn't just grieving. I was afraid. Because if Raya had truly come back after all these years, it wasn't for closure. It was for war. That night, after Raya's visit, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face on my porch. Unchanged. Unapologetic. As if 15 years had been nothing but a pause between acts. Memories I had buried long ago began to crawl back. Memories of when Daniel first brought her home. He was 20. She was 19. Daniel walked into the house that day with a light in his eyes I hadn't seen since childhood. "This is Raya," he said, his voice trembling like he was introducing me to royalty. She was beautiful. I'll give her that. Dark hair, sharp smile, eyes that made people lean closer when she spoke. But there was something else, a restlessness in her, like she was always planning her escape. Still, Daniel adored her. And for a time, that was enough for me. I remember late nights hearing them laugh in the kitchen. Plans whispered between them about starting a company, building a life together. He told me, "Mom, she believes in me. She's my partner in everything." For a while, I believed it too. But then came the fights. The slammed doors. Daniel pacing the living room, red-faced, muttering words I'd never heard him use before. And one night, she was gone. No note. No call. Just a text Daniel showed me, 4 words long. I can't do this. Those words shattered him. He stopped eating. He stopped sleeping. For weeks, he lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling. I watched my son, my strong, stubborn boy, turn into a shell. And I hated her for it. Even years later, when Daniel found his footing again, when his company began to grow, that scar was still there. He never spoke her name, but I saw it in his eyes when he thought no one was watching. The hurt. The betrayal. So when she stood on my porch yesterday, asking for what was owed, all I could think was, she took his heart once. And now, she was back to take the rest. But deep down, a question gnawed at me. Why now? Why, after 15 years of silence, would Raya return? And why speak of debts, as if Daniel had left something unfinished? I didn't have the answer yet. But soon, I'd learn the truth. And it would unravel everything I thought I knew about my son, and the woman who left him behind. It didn't take long. 3 days after she showed up on my porch, Raya came back. Not with flowers. Not with condolences. But with a leather briefcase and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I almost didn't open the door. But something in me wanted to hear what poison she'd bring this time. So I let her in. She walked through my house like she'd never left it. Her heels clicked on the floor Daniel used to crawl across as a baby. She glanced at his pictures on the wall, not with sadness, not with guilt, but with calculation. Like she was sizing up the weight of his ghost. We sat at the kitchen table. The same table where she and Daniel once whispered about dreams of building a company, of making it big. Now it was just the two of us. And she came armed with words sharper than any knife. I'll be direct, Mrs. Hayes, she said, folding her hands neatly on the table. Daniel owed me. He built his empire with my help. I was there at the beginning. And now that he's gone, I expect my share. My hands clenched against the table. Your share? I hissed. You walked out on him. 15 years ago, you left him broken on that same couch over there. You don't deserve a dime. Her expression didn't change. She leaned forward, her voice low, deliberate. You think you know everything, but you don't. Daniel and I made promises. Commitments. I gave him more than you realize. And those promises don't vanish just because he's gone. I felt the heat rise in my chest. Promises? You abandoned him. You broke him. Don't you dare stand in my house and talk about what you're owed. Raya's smile returned, thin and cruel. You can slam doors, Mrs. Hayes. You can spit your anger at me. But this isn't about your opinion of me. It's about what's mine. And believe me, I'll get it. One way or another. I stood up, shaking, pointing toward the door. Get out. Get out of my house before I forget my manners. She rose slowly, unbothered, as if this was all part of some game she'd already planned. She gathered her briefcase, smoothed her dress, and walked to the door without looking back. But just before stepping outside, she paused. Her voice carried through the silence like ice water down my spine. This is just the beginning. The door shut behind her, and the house was quiet again. But this time, the silence didn't feel like grief. It felt like war. It didn't take long for Raya to make good on her threat. A week later, I was standing at my mailbox, sorting through bills and sympathy cards, when I saw it. A thick envelope. My name printed neatly across the front. Inside, legal papers. She was suing me. Challenging Daniel's will. Demanding the court freeze his estate until her rightful claim was settled. I read the words over and over, my hands trembling so badly the pages rattled. It didn't feel real. My son had been gone less than a month, and already, his memory, his fortune, had been dragged into a battlefield. By the next morning, the story hit the news. Millionaire tech founder's ex-fiancée files lawsuit against inheritance. Daniel's face was everywhere, on TV, in the papers, plastered across the internet. Except now, it wasn't stories of his success. It was gossip. It was scandal. At the grocery store, people stared as I passed. At church, whispers followed me down the aisle. Even my neighbors avoided my eyes, as if I'd done something wrong. All because of her. I sat at my kitchen table, clutching the newspaper, my throat burning with rage. Grief was one thing, grief was private. But humiliation? That was different. Raya hadn't just stepped back into my life. She had dragged my son's name, and mine, into the mud. I called the lawyer, desperate for reassurance. He sighed, his voice heavy. "Mrs. Hayes, it happens more often than you'd think. Ex-partners, old business associates, people come out of the woodwork when money's involved. Most of them don't win." "Most?" I pressed. He hesitated. "Raya has filed serious claims. She's not just grasping in the dark. She has documents, witnesses. We'll fight it, but it won't be quick." Documents. Witnesses. The words chilled me. What did she have? And how could she possibly prove it? That night, as I lay in bed, I kept hearing her voice at my door. "This is just the beginning." And I realized, she was right. This wasn't grief anymore. This wasn't mourning. This was war. And she had just fired the first shot. The first letter came on a Wednesday. No return address. Just my name scrawled in shaky handwriting across a plain envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No greeting. No signature. Just one line, written in dark ink. "Raya isn't lying. She gave up more than you'll ever know." I crumpled it up instantly, tossed it in the trash. Some bitter friend of hers, I thought. Someone trying to rattle me. But then came the second letter. This one typed. Precise. It arrived 2 days later, slipped through my mail slot like a shadow. It said, "Daniel didn't do it alone. Look deeper." She was there in the beginning. I stared at those words until they blurred. My heart pounded as I dug through the trash to find the first letter again. Together, they painted a picture I didn't want to see. And then, the emails started. The first came from an anonymous account. No name, no location. Just a subject line. The will isn't the full story. The body of the email was longer this time. Daniel owed her. Ask about the company. Ask about the baby. You don't know your son like you think you do. I froze. The baby? My hand shook so badly I nearly dropped the laptop. What baby? Daniel had never said anything about a child. Never. I slammed the computer shut and sat in the silence of my kitchen, my chest tight, my mind racing. It had to be lies. It had to be. But the messages kept coming. Some supportive, "Stay strong, don't let her win." Some cruel, "You're stealing what doesn't belong to you." And some, haunting. Like the last one I read that week. He wasn't the man you thought he was. I wanted to dismiss them. I wanted to hold on to the image of my son, brilliant, kind, successful, mine. But the words crawled under my skin and stayed there. Because the truth is, every message, every letter, every whisper, planted a seed of doubt. And once doubt takes root, it doesn't let go. The letters wouldn't leave me alone. The words echoed in my head, louder every night. Look deeper. Ask about the company. Ask about the baby. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know the truth. So one rainy afternoon, I went to Daniel's old storage unit. The key was still on my ring, where it had hung for years. I hadn't stepped inside since he first rented it, back when his startup was nothing but a dream and a handful of broken laptops. The door screeched open. Inside, dust, boxes stacked to the ceiling, the faint smell of paper and time. It felt like stepping into a mausoleum of his younger self. I started digging. Old textbooks. Clothes he never took to college. Binders full of notes and sketches, ideas that probably never made it past the page. And then, a box labeled in Daniel's messy handwriting. Our plusty, early days. My breath caught. Raya and Daniel. I lifted the lid. Inside were notebooks, scribbled business plans, coffee-stained receipts, late-night brainstorming sessions. Her handwriting was everywhere. Right alongside his. They weren't just lovers. They were partners. Partners in something real. I sank onto the floor, my hands shaking as I flipped through the pages. Diagrams of apps, scribbled revenue models, lists of potential investors. Every page screamed one truth. She had been there at the beginning. I wanted to slam the box shut. I wanted to pretend I hadn't seen it. But then, I found something worse. At the bottom of the box, tucked between journals, was a folded medical form. My hands trembled as I opened it. It was from a clinic. A pregnancy confirmation. Raya's name. Dated 15 years ago. My vision blurred. The air left my lungs. A baby. There had been a baby. But scrawled across the top corner, in Daniel's handwriting, were 2 words. Lost her. I dropped the paper as if it burned me. I pressed my back against the wall of the storage unit, clutching my chest. Tears blurred my eyes, my throat thick with grief. I had lost my son. But years before, Daniel and Raya had lost something too. Something I never even knew existed. And suddenly, Raya's words didn't sound like empty threats. They sounded like truth. For the first time, I wasn't sure what side of the story I belonged on anymore. I couldn't carry the weight of what I'd found in that storage unit alone. The notebooks. Her handwriting. The medical form. It gnawed at me until finally, I called her. Raya. When she answered, her voice was calm, too calm. Almost as if she'd been waiting. We agreed to meet in a small cafe across town. Neutral ground. I told myself it was just to confront her, to demand answers. But deep down, I think I was searching for something else. The truth. She was already there when I arrived. Sitting by the window, hands wrapped around a cup of tea gone cold. No makeup. No armor. For the first time since she'd returned, she looked less like a threat, and more like a ghost of her former self. We sat across from each other in silence for a long moment. Finally, I slid the medical form across the table. Her eyes flickered down, and then, she closed them. A single tear slid across her cheek. You found it, she whispered. I gripped the table. You were pregnant. Why didn't anyone tell me? Why didn't he tell me? Her voice cracked. Because we lost her before there was even time. I miscarried at 5 months. And Daniel, he couldn't handle it. He drowned in guilt. He blamed me, he blamed himself, he blamed the world. And after that, nothing was the same. My throat tightened. Her words felt like a knife twisting in my chest. You left him, I said bitterly. Do you know what that did to him? To me? He was broken when you walked away. Raya shook her head, eyes blazing now. No. You don't understand. I didn't leave because I wanted to. I left because I had to. Daniel, he changed. He became obsessed. Controlling. The startup consumed him, and after we lost the baby, he was furious all the time. He didn't eat, didn't sleep, didn't look at me like a person anymore. I was just another part of the machine he was building. And I was drowning right alongside him. Her hands trembled as she spoke. I thought if I stayed, one of us wouldn't survive it. So I ran. And I've hated myself for it every single day since. The cafe around us hummed with quiet chatter, but it felt like we were sitting inside a bubble of silence. Her words hung heavy between us. For 15 years, I had told myself a story. That Raya was the villain. That she had abandoned my son, heartless, selfish, cruel. But now, I wasn't so sure. Because the pain in her voice wasn't a performance. It was real. It was raw. And then she reached into her bag. Pulled out an envelope. Inside was a letter. Daniel's handwriting. The date, 3 years ago. I read it there at the table, my hands shaking. Raya, I was wrong. About everything. I drove you away. I blamed you when I should have loved you harder. I'll never forgive myself for what I did, or for what we lost. I hope, someday, you can. My vision blurred with tears. The letter slipped from my hands. I looked at Raya, and for the first time I didn't see an enemy. I saw a woman who had loved my son, and who had suffered alongside him in ways I never knew. And in that moment, I wasn't sure who I was angrier at. Her, or him. I drove home from that cafe in silence. Raya's words kept circling in my head. Her tears. Her confession. That letter in Daniel's handwriting, begging forgiveness. I wanted to hate her. It would have been so much easier if I could. But the truth was harder. Because for the first time, I wasn't sure my son had been the hero of the story. When I got home, I pulled out the old photo albums. Page after page of Daniel's life stared back at me. The boy with scraped knees and missing teeth. The teenager with stormy eyes and clenched fists. The man with ambition burning so brightly, it lit up every room, and sometimes burned those around him. And slowly, memories I had buried began to rise. The times he'd snapped at me when I asked too many questions about his work. The nights he came home in college, red-eyed and furious, slamming his bedroom door. The way he sometimes pushed people away, friends, partners, even me, if they didn't fit into his plans. Back then, I told myself it was stress. That he was just young, ambitious, learning how to carry the weight of the world. But now, I wondered. Had those cracks always been there? I remembered one night in particular. Daniel was 21. He and Raya had come over for dinner. I made roast chicken. The conversation was light, until it wasn't. Something small set him off. I can't even remember what. But suddenly, his voice was sharp, accusing Raya of not supporting him enough, of doubting his vision. She sat there in silence, eyes down, as he ranted. And when I tried to calm him, he turned that anger on me. Told me I didn't understand, that I was holding him back. He stormed out of the house, leaving Raya and me in stunned silence. I told myself it was just stress, that he'd apologize later. And he did. He always did. But looking back now, I can't shake the question. What if Raya was right? What if Daniel wasn't just driven, but dangerous in his obsession? I pressed the photo album shut, tears stinging my eyes. I wanted to remember him as my boy. The child who held my hand on the first day of school. The man who hugged me after every business milestone, whispering, "Couldn't have done it without you, Mom." But the truth was different. The truth was messy. Flawed. Human. And maybe that was the hardest part of grief. Not just losing the person you love, but losing the version of them you thought was real. After weeks of doubt and sleepless nights, I thought nothing could surprise me anymore. I was wrong. It happened on a gray afternoon at my lawyer's office. He had called me in, his voice unusually tight over the phone. When I arrived, he slid a thin file across the desk. "Mrs. Hayes," he said quietly, "we need to discuss something that's come to light." I opened the file. Inside was a draft of a new will. My son's will. It wasn't signed. It wasn't official. But the date on the document stopped my heart cold. 3 months before his death. My hands trembled as I scanned the pages. The terms were different. The foundation for underprivileged youth was still there. My name was still there. But so was hers. Raya. He had planned to include her again. Not as an equal heir, but as someone entitled to a portion of his fortune. It wasn't everything, but it was something. Enough to prove intent. I slammed the folder shut, anger and confusion swirling inside me. Why wasn't I told about this sooner? I demanded. The lawyer's eyes flickered with unease. Because, Mrs. Hayes, the signed version of this document should exist. It was logged in our system. But it's missing. Missing. The word echoed in my chest like a drum. Somebody had removed it. Somebody had erased Daniel's last wishes. I gripped the edge of the desk, my voice low, shaking. "Are you telling me someone destroyed my son's will?" He didn't answer. And maybe he didn't need to. Because I already knew what this meant. This wasn't just grief. This wasn't just a lawsuit. This was sabotage. But who would do it? And why? Was it the lawyer's firm? A bitter business partner? Or Raya herself, manipulating me into believing she was the victim? I left the office with the draft tucked under my arm, the air biting cold as I stepped outside. The city looked the same, cars rushing past, strangers crossing the street, life moving on. But for me, everything had shifted. Because now, it wasn't just about love or grief or betrayal. Now, it was a mystery. A missing will. A hidden truth. And I had no idea how deep the shadows went. The courtroom smelled of polished wood and stale coffee. Every seat was filled. Reporters in the back, their pens ready. Neighbors, curious strangers, even old friends, all watching as if my grief were a spectacle. At the front, the judge adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. "This is the matter of the estate of Daniel Hayes." My son's name. Echoing through the chamber like a ghost. I sat stiffly beside my lawyer, my hands clenched in my lap. Cross the aisle. Raya. Her face was calm, almost serene. Like she had been waiting 15 years for this moment. The arguments began. Her lawyer stood first. "Your Honor, my client is not a stranger seeking a handout. She was Daniel Hayes' fiancée, his partner, both in life and in the very company that made him wealthy. She has proof of her involvement, proof of promises made, promises Daniel himself attempted to honor before his death." He laid out documents. The notebooks I'd seen in storage. Receipts with her handwriting. Emails showing her role in those early days. And then, the letter. The one Daniel had written 3 years ago, begging for forgiveness. When it was read aloud, my throat tightened. Even the judge shifted uneasily. Daniel's voice filled the room, not literally, but through ink and paper. Raw. Regretful. Alive in a way that gutted me. My lawyer rose to respond. "Your Honor, these items do not constitute legal standing. The only valid document is the signed will, leaving the estate entirely to Mrs. Hayes. Whatever promises may have existed between Mr. Hayes and Ms. Bennett, he wouldn't even say Raya's name, they were never formalized." I forced myself to sit tall, though inside, I was trembling. When the judge asked if I wished to speak, I hesitated, then rose. "My son was generous," I said, my voice shaking. "But he was also private. He made his choice. He left his fortune to me, not to her. Whatever happened between them happened long ago. He had 15 years to change his will. He didn't. That should speak louder than old notebooks and broken promises. For the first time, Raya's calm broke. She stood, her voice sharp, trembling with anger. He did change it. He drafted a new will, and someone destroyed it. Her words cracked through the room like thunder. Gasps echoed from the benches. The judge raised a hand. "Ms. Bennet, sit down." But the damage was done. The secret of the missing will was out. And now, everyone knew. I sank back into my chair, my chest tight. Because whether or not she was telling the truth, her words had planted doubt in every mind in that courtroom. And the worst part? They had planted it in mine, too. After that explosive day in court, I couldn't sleep. I sat awake until dawn, staring at boxes I'd dragged back from storage. Somewhere, I thought, there had to be more. Something Daniel left behind. Something that wasn't tainted by lawyers or lawsuits. That's when I found it. At the bottom of a battered cardboard box, hidden beneath files and receipts, was a leather-bound journal. Worn. Frayed. His handwriting scratched across the first page. Daniel's private thoughts. My hand shook as I opened it. Page after page spilled out pieces of him I had never seen. His dreams. His regrets. His loneliness. And then, near the end, dated just weeks before his death, I found the words that stopped my heart. I can't escape the past. No matter how high I climb, it follows me. I see her face every night, Raya. I destroyed us. I blamed her for what we lost, when it was me. I never stopped loving her. But I can't go back. Mom deserves everything, but Raya deserves something too. If I had more time, I'd make it right. I clutched the journal to my chest, tears streaming down my face. Because in his final words, my son admitted everything I didn't want to believe. His love. His guilt. His unfinished attempt to reconcile the two women who had defined his life. The next morning, I brought the journal to court. When the judge asked if I had anything to add, I rose to my feet, holding the worn leather like it was holy scripture. And then I read. My voice broke as Daniel's confession filled the silent courtroom. Every word was a wound. Every sentence, a reminder that he had carried secrets I never saw. When I finished, the room was utterly still. And then, from across the aisle, I heard a sound I never expected. Raya was sobbing. Not the sharp, defiant woman who had stormed into my home weeks earlier. But a broken woman, shaking, her face buried in her hands. For the first time, I believed her grief was real. That she hadn't come just for money. She had come because a part of her had died with him, too. And I, his mother, stood in the middle, torn between anger, sorrow, and something dangerously close to compassion. Because in that moment, I realized. The man we were both fighting over was gone. All we had left were pieces of him. And the truth was more complicated than either of us wanted to face. The day of the verdict, the courtroom was silent. You could feel the weight in the air, heavy as stone. Everyone was waiting. Waiting to see how my son's life, and fortune, would be divided. I sat at the front, the journal clutched in my lap. Across the aisle, Raya sat still, her hands folded tightly, her eyes red from tears. Two women, bound by one man. Neither of us wanting to be there. Both of us with everything to lose. The judge entered, adjusted his glasses, and spoke slowly. I have reviewed the evidence, the testimony, and the documents provided. This case is not simple. It is not black and white. It is a story of love, loss, mistakes, and unfinished intentions. His words echoed like a sermon. Every head in the courtroom leaned forward. Legally, the signed will leaves the estate entirely to Mrs. Hayes. My chest tightened with relief and dread. But, he continued, his voice steady, it is clear from journal entries, letters, and testimony that Mr. Hayes intended to include Ms. Bennet. He did not finalize the document, but his intent is undeniable. To ignore that would be to ignore his voice from beyond the grave. The room buzzed with murmurs. The judge raised his gavel, silencing them. Therefore, this court rules that a portion of the estate, $6 million, will be granted to Ms. Bennet. The remainder will remain with Mrs. Hayes. This decision is final. The gavel struck. The sound rang like a gunshot through my chest. I sat frozen. Not victory. Not defeat. Something in between. Raya didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. She simply closed her eyes and let out a breath, as if she had been holding it for 15 years. $6 million. But it wasn't the money that mattered. It was recognition. It was Daniel's unfinished promise, finally, in some way, honored. When the judge dismissed the court, I rose to leave. As I walked past her, our eyes met. For the first time, there was no anger between us. No venom. Just exhaustion. And the faintest flicker of understanding. Because we both knew, there were no winners in this story. Just two women carrying the pieces of a man who was gone. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, microphones shoved in my face. Mrs. Hayes, how do you feel about losing a portion of the inheritance? Do you think Daniel would approve of this ruling? I didn't answer. I just pushed through the crowd, clutching my son's journal to my chest. Because the truth was, no amount of money could heal what had been broken. A year later, I stood in front of a crowd at the university auditorium. A banner hung above the stage. The Daniel Hayes Foundation, Scholarship Launch. The seats were filled with students, young men and women Daniel would have admired. Bright. Hungry. Dreaming of building something of their own. I spoke about him that day. About the boy who grew up without a father, who pushed himself harder than anyone I'd ever known. About the man who built something out of nothing. And about the son I lost too soon. The applause washed over me, but it didn't touch the hollow place in my chest. Some wounds never close. After the ceremony, as people milled around, I felt a presence beside me. Raya. She looked different. Softer. Time had worn down her edges. She was on the foundation board now, working quietly in the background. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. A nod between us was enough. Not forgiveness, but understanding. That night, when I returned home, I found an envelope waiting in my email inbox. The sender's name froze me where I stood. Daniel. I opened it with shaking hands. It was a message he had scheduled through some kind of legacy service. A letter, written before he died. His voice filled the room as my eyes moved across the screen. Mom. If you're reading this, it means I didn't get to say goodbye. I'm sorry for that. I know I hurt you with my secrets. I know I left things unfinished. I should have told you about Raya, about what we lost, about the mistakes I made. But I didn't. I carried it all inside me, until the end. If she comes back, please don't hate her. She loved me once, and I loved her. Not perfectly. Not gently. But truly. And you gave me everything. A life. A chance. A love no one else ever could. If I could split myself in two, I would have left a piece of me with each of you. Please don't fight over the money. Please don't let that be the last chapter of my story. Build something better with it. Together, if you can. By the time I reached the end, my tears blurred the words. The screen glowed softly in the dark, like his voice was reaching out from another world. I pressed my hand against the monitor and whispered into the silence. I'll try, Daniel. I'll try. The house was quiet again. But this time, the silence didn't feel like loss. It felt like a beginning.